Hello everyone, welcome to Primetime Recaps. Please like and subscribe to support the channel. It will make us happy and help us keep making videos like this. Today, I'm going to be explaining a movie titled Two Worlds. Warning, spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie opens up with Remy, a simple and passive French man, with a beautiful wife and 2 kids. He works as an art restorateur, but recently he keeps experiencing strange things. His body would involuntarily sink into all kinds of furniture, even his own bed isn't left out. He doubts whether it is his own delusion, until his studio becomes flooded. When he tries to save all the oil paintings, he is suddenly dragged into the water by a powerful force. After he comes out from the water, he finds himself in the center of a lake in the wild. He looks around in confusion as he attempts to catch his breath. He walks towards the shore and suddenly, he sees a few tribesmen with strange clothes running towards him. He becomes so scared and tries to escape, but he falls back into the water. Fortunately, he is pulled out of the water by his coworker from the other world, who thinks he accidentally fell into the water and almost drowned himself. He seeks to convince himself all was a delusion, but the experience seemed too real. When he gets home, he tells his wife Lucille about his strange experience, but she doesn't seem very interested. Instead, she looks very anxious. After struggling for a while, Lucille tells him that she is in love with her colleague Anton, thus, she wants a divorce. Later on, she brings her lover to their home and introduces him to Remy. After a delightful conversation, Remy accepts his fate and promises to move out soon, so that Lucille and her lover could live together. Remy soon becomes the poorest man in the world, who lost his career and family in just one day. His family surrounds him to comfort him and cheer him up, since he is such a passive man. Soon, everyone forgets about him as his cousin arrives. Remy feels bored and so he leaves the table and goes to the kitchen to pour himself a cup of coffee. Unexpectedly, strange things happen again. The family cat tries jumping to the fridge and suddenly stops moving in midair. Noticing this, Remy examined the cat curiously flipping it around in the air. Remy doesn't realize time has stopped. He calls out to his family to come and see this, but doesn't hear any response. Suddenly, the lights in the kitchen start to blink and Remy begins to sink into the floor. He desperately calls for help, but no one notices him. As he continues to scream for help, he is pulled to the other world. Remy finds himself in the middle of a strange forest. Soon after, he finds a group of people butchering an animal and he decides to approach them to ask some questions. A tall and scary-looking man talks to Remy, but sadly, he can't understand him. The group then decides to feed Remy to their master. Realizing that something isn't right, Remy runs for his life. After a long chase, he ends up entering a dark cave. Remy explores the cave to look for help. Soon, he encounters a creature that bites his neck and he is forced to run again. While running, he is suddenly pulled back to his parents' house in the modern world. Interrupted by the commotion in the kitchen, Remy's family decides to check on him. They find him battered and surrounded by rubble. He tries to explain what happened, but he gets scolded for the broken French press instead. After a few awkward conversations, Remy faints. He is then taken to a hospital and examined by a doctor for his injuries. He tries to explain what happened to the doctor, but she tells him to meet a shrink instead. The following day, when Remy is in his studio, surrounded by his landlord, insurance representative, bank representative and clients, he starts sinking into the floor again. He then emerges from a basket into the other world. He is welcomed with cheers from the tribesmen. Remy tries to communicate with the tribesmen, but they fail to understand each other. Moments later, they force him to eat a berry. The berry helps him understand their language and he finally finds out the reason he was pulled into this world repeatedly. There, it turns out the tribesmen are ruled by a cannibal called Tyrant Zoltan. Zoltan has not only enslaved them, but he also eats them when he feels hungry. Thus, everyone is afraid of him. The elders and mages decipher the artifact from their ancestors, which says a savior will come from another world and who would help them kill Zoltan and liberate everyone from slavery. They use the method from the artifact to call their savior from time to time. Upon hearing this, Remy finally understands the strange things that has been happening to him. They show him the village of Zoltan's men and ask him to destroy it. Initially, he refuses, telling them he is just an ordinary man and not their savior, but when they decide to hang Remy on top of the tower and threaten to drop him, he is left with no choice than to agree. Soon, he is led to an isolated room where he is left to plan the destruction of Zoltan. He sits in front of a table filled with food, as he tries to figure out what to do. As he then grabs the watermelon in front of him, he goes back in his studio. Later that day, Remy goes to the library to learn more about the other world. After searching the internet and getting no result, he then decides to move on to look for books about self-defense instead. When he returned to the other world, he is given a sword by the tribesmen. They ask for help to leave the settlement and he agrees to help. When they arrive the settlement's borders, Remy asks why they never tried leaving. They tell him that if they crossed the borders, they would be struck by lightning. Remy, realizing that it is just superstition, tells them to cross the borders. He crosses the border first to show them nothing terrible would happen. Following this, the entire tribe follows him to leave the settlement and find a new place to call home. Remy and the tribesmen travel and eventually, they meet two of Zoltan's men in a forest. The men tell them to go back, but Remy fights them with his suave fencing skills, which enables him kill one of Zoltan's men, forcing the other one to retreat. Before leaving, Zoltan's soldier warns him that war is coming. Remy then confronts the tribesmen about not helping him with the fight and they explain that they didn't want to tamper with the prophecy by helping him. Shortly after, the tribesmen begin to drag the soldier's corpse. When Remy inquires what they are going to do with it, he then learns that they plan on eating it as part of their tradition. Shocked, Remy orders them to stop and forbids cannibalism starting that day. Moments later, some of his people confirm that war is truly coming. Back in his world, Remy revisits the library for books about waging war and governance. He studies the books to prepare procedures for the coming war against Zoltan's army. When he returns to the other world, he gives a speech and prepares the tribesmen to battle. At night, Remy decides to have fun with Kara and other women in the tribe. Sadly, while surrounded by beautiful women, Remy realizes that he still loves Lucille and decides to give up on the fun. Shortly after, he hears his son calling and returns to his world. After a heartfelt talk with his son, he returns to the other world, in the middle of a war with only his sleepwear. He then orders his army to move towards higher grounds and retreat. They regroup and prepared for a counterattack against the enemy the next day. The next morning, Remy stands in front of the Zoltanians, waking them up by throwing insults and rocks at them. He then approaches the encampment and starts slapping the sleeping soldiers. Afterwards, Remy runs for his life and is chased by the entire Zoltanian army, which is part of Remy's plan. Though he is leading the Zoltanians to an open field, he signals his army to begin their attack before hiding inside a huge tree trunk. As Remy's army appear, they fire a rain of arrows down on the Zoltanians. The two armies continue to fight. Surprisingly, the Zoltanians are defeated and forced to retreat. Remy emerges from the tree trunk and celebrates the victory with his people. Afterwards, they move to a new land and begin constructing Remy's kingdom. As time passes, the new kingdom flourishes under a bearded Remy's guidance. He couldn't imagine an ordinary man like him could be worshipped like this. He feels that his potential has been unleashed. When he feels tired of guiding the country, he spends some time with his favorite concubine. Anytime he encounters problems during the rule of his kingdom, he travels back to the modern world to search for solutions. After being king in his world for almost half a year, he goes back to his real life and faces his ex-wife and her boyfriend. He is no longer that weak and passive man he was before. When Antoine orders Remy to leave the house so he could enjoy time with Lucille, Remy gets angry and beats him up. Satisfied with the scared Antoine, he leaves him with Lucille. On the way to his studio, Remy is almost hit by a car. The driver gets out confronting him, but Remy intimidates the man to submission. A few people are waiting for him in order to discuss his financial problems in front of his studio. He tells them that he is changing jobs. After a while, he starts working as a flyer distributor for an Indian restaurant. Unhappy with the job, Remy throws the flyers and leaves. While walking, the world stops, and as soon as he notices this, Remy is happy. He dives into the road and emerges back in the other world. Shortly after, he finds Kara, his new lover, waiting for him. He asks her if anything had happened while he was away. He then learns that all is well, thus, he decides to have some fun with her. As Remy's greed begins to grow, he starts to enslave his citizens to build more fancy palaces for him. One day, Remy meets with his citizens to discuss problems in his kingdom. He rushes to address them, and as he sits on a grand chair for the meeting, and he is soon notified that some citizens are revolting because they are overworked. He rushes to meet the rebels, but failed to convince them to resume their work. They feel that being slaves to Zoltan was even better than being overworked like this. The revolt eventually gets out of hand, and Remy is forced to escape the mob. After being frustrated, he decides to give up on his kingdom and return to his world. Back in his world, he visits his friend Serge and asks to borrow a studio so he could start working again. As time goes by, he builds his relationship with one of his clients, Delphine. Later that night, at the key moment when Remy is kissed by Delphine, he is summoned back to the cave in the other world, where he finds Riemkiel wounded. He is then forced to fight and kill Zoltan to fulfill the prophecy. Zoltan finds Remy and shortly after, confronts him. While they are fighting, Remy picks up a spear and thrusts it through Zoltan's chest. The creature then flees outside the cave to die in front of the tribesmen. Remy follows him outside, feeling triumphant in an unexpected turn of events. Remy learns the last part about the prophecy, which was for his people to eat him so they could have his strength and wisdom. Wanting no part of that, he quickly runs away from his people, but the elders throw the artifact into the fire pit so Remy would stay in this world forever. After a long chase, Remy is captured because of his own carelessness, and as he is about to get eaten, Kara reaches for the artifact in the fire pit and throws it into the river. Remy is saved and returns to the modern world. He wakes up in a hospital. Elated to have escaped being eaten, he later finds his loved ones waiting for him in the hospital hallway. He assures them he is fine and walks towards Delphine and Lucille. He tries introducing them, but they already got to know each other while Remy was still unconscious. Delphine leaves shortly after, and Remy is left alone with Lucille, who reveals to Remy that she kicked Anton out of her life. She asks him to come back, but Remy expresses his anger and refuses her request. He then calls a taxi and leaves her. Several days later, Remy walks on a beach in Barcelona where he meets up with his children and Lucille. He sits down with Lucille and happily reunites. Meanwhile, the people in Remy's kingdom erect a statue of Remy in his honor. The movie ends with Remy watching the news on TV about the discovery of an early painting of the Mona Lisa. Remy smiles when he sees the painting up close. It turns out that it is the painting Remy made for Kara in the other world, but archaeologists say that they just found an early work by Da Vinci, and according to the style, they are pretty sure it was painted by Da Vinci when he was just 5 years old. I hope you liked the movie. Please turn on the bell icon to be the first to watch our videos when we post contents like this. You can also suggest a movie you would love us to explain in the comments section. Thanks for watching.